हेलो इग्नू पॉइंट्स, कैसे हैं आप सब। आई होप आप सब अच्छे होंगे। तो आज का हमारा असाइनमेंट है MEG-1 फॉर 2023 एंड 2024. So let's get started. No, attempt any 5 question. Question number 1 is compulsory. Attempt any 2 of the excerpts of poem which given below with reference to their context. Okay. Explain any 2 of the excerpts of poem given below with reference to their context. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night. What immortal hand or eye dare frame the fearful symmetry? The Tiger is the poem by visionary English poet William Blake and is often used to be the most widely anthologized poem in the English language. The first stanza set up the poem's main thematic questions: who created the tiger, how and why. The speaker is the poem's sister poem. The lamb is able to identify God as the creator of the lamb because the small creature seems to represent joy, love and freedom, but the tiger is an entirely different figure altogether. The poem does imply that God created the tiger too, but in the tiger's threat of violence and capacity for the killing, it's harder for human being to understand God's motivation and creating it. Essentially, the main aim of the poem is to flesh out this mystery and to hint at possible answer. The poem begins with an intense of emphasis with the immediate repetition of tiger, which signals to the reader that the tiger is the central figure throughout, and like the lamb, the tiger directly addresses the central figure with apostrophe throughout. Indeed, the poem is a kind of odd and a fearful meditation on the fact of tiger existence. The alternative burning bright creates the visual image of a flash of impressive color moving through the forest of the night, which is both a beautiful sight and a terrifying one. Though the poem predates the theory of psychoanalysis but forward by Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, the forest can be interpreted both as a tiger's literal habitat and as a symbol of a human subconscious, unconscious, and as this is a poem in part about creativity. The dark and mysterious atmosphere of the forest hints at the mysteries of creation both in the human and the godly realms. Next question. Dying is an art like everything else. I do it exceptionally well. There is also body performance and pain, but in the end, the reader is left with little doubt that the speaker, a suffering woman, out of revenge, is reborn as a mythological creature capable of eating men. Male character plays an important role in Plath's poetry and in Lady Lazarus. They features prominently the fact that she used German words, her doctor, her enemy, as and so on, relates to her father who was German. He had a complex relationship with Otto Plath, her poem's daddy, at least to this. Her marriage to fellow poet Ted Hughes ended in the summer of 1962 when Sylvia Plath got to know of an affair about Hughes and one Asia Wevel. This must have influenced the tone of the poem with regards to the warning given to all males near the end. It is clear from reading biographies and her letters that the final few months of Sylvia Plath's life were a mix of creative high and devastating emotional and physiological lows. She never could quite find a tolerable way through. From the title, with its reference to the biblical Lazarus raised from the dead by Christ, to the final stanza where the speaker, having seen burned to ash, rises like a phoenix, the emphasis is in regeneration, new form, miraculous transformation, the artistic work living on. The most controversial aspect of the poem is the reference to the awful event at the Belsen concentration camp run by the Nazis in the Second World War. Jews from all sorts of backgrounds were subject to the most gruesome experiment before being murdered. Discuss Chaucer's handling of the fable in the Nun Priest's Tale. Novelty of Chaucer lies in the treatment of the fable. He fuses most successfully and artistically the animal and the human. There are transitions from one level to the other. They make the poem much more delightful than the original source. But the most striking feature of the poem is its more heroic element. The Nurse Pressed tale is one of the Chaucer's most brilliant tales and it functions on several levels. The tale is an outstanding example of the literary style known as a bestiary, in which animals behave like human beings. Consequently, this type of fable is often an insult to men or a commentary on men's foibles. To suggest that animals behave like humans is to suggest that humans often behave like animals. This tale is told using the technique of the mock heroic, which takes a trivial event and elevates it into something that of great universal import. Alexander Pope's poem "The Rape of the Lock" is an excellent example of mock heroic composition. It treats a trivial event, the theft of a lock of hair, in this case, as if it were sublime. Thus, then when dawn wrestled, the fox runs off with constantly clear in his jaws. The chase that ensues involves very creature on the premises, and the entire scene is narrated in the elevated language found in the great epic, where such language was used to enhance the splendid deeds of epic heroes. Chaucer used elevated language to describe a fox catching a rooster in the barnyard, a far cry from the classic epics. The chase itself reminds one of Aeschylus' rooster in the chasing Hector around the battlements in the Iliad. To compare the plight of Conchiclear to that of Homer's Hector, and to suggest that the chase of the fox is an epic chase similar to classic epics indicates the comic absurdity of the situation. The mock heroic tone is also used in the other instances when the Nurse Pressed describe the capture of the Don Rizzle and refers to the event in terms of the prominent traitors as a new. And when the Barnyard animal discuss high philosophical and theological questions for Lady Petiole and Cosclear to discuss divine foreknowledge in a high intellectual and moral tone in the context of Barnyard Chicken is the height of comic irony. We must also remember the cause of the discussion of divine foreknowledge. Lady Petiole Pertilot thinks that the Conchiclear's dream or nightmare was a result of this constipation, and she recommended a laxative. Conchiclear rebuttal is a brilliant use of classic source of that comment on dreams and is marvelously comic means of providing that he is not constipated and does not need a laxative. Throughout the mock heroic, mankind loses much of its human dignity and is reduced to animal values. The Nurse Pressed ideas and position are set up in his genuinely ironic attitude towards both the simple life of the widow and the life of the rich and the great as represented by the cook. Conchiclear, the Nurse Pressed's opening line set up the contrast. A poor old widow with little property and small income leads a sparse life, and it does not cost much for her to get along. The implication is that living the humble Christian life is easier for the people than for the rich, who have, like Conchiclear, many obligations and great responsibilities. The Nurse Pressed contrasts the two human worlds of the poor and the rich in the description of the poor widow and elegant Conchiclear. The widow was poor and hell was full city. That is black from the heart flame, where she had eaten many a slim or slender meal. Notice the contrast. The term boar and hell comes from countless words of the time and conjures up the image of a castle. The idea of a sooty boar or hall is absurd. The rich would never allow such a thing, yet soot is inevitable in a peasant's hut, and from the peasant's point of view, the cleanliness fetish of the rich may also be observed. A slender meal would, of course, be unthinkable among the rich, but it is all the poor widow has. Likewise, the widow has no great need of any not sauce, because she has no gamey food meats preserved past their reason, and no aristocratic recipe. She has no dainty morsel to pass through her throat. But then, when Chaucer substitutes the word throat for the expected lips, the dainty morsel that the image calls up is no longer very dainty. Consider the Garden by Andrew Marvell as didactic poem. Okay, The Garden is one of the Andrew Marvell's most famous poems and takes the form of a meditation in a garden. This setting has led critics to interpret the poem as a response to the original biblical Garden Eden, while other commentators have understood the poem as a meditation about sex, political ambition, and various other themes. It celebrated lines about annihilating all that's made to a green thought in a green shade are especially memorable and evocative. Below in the garden, followed by a brief summary and analysis of this major Marvell poem. The Garden is a classic example of something that Andrew Marvell explores in many of this poem. The idea of discussing two extremes or opposite and putting forward a balanced and poised argument. Marvell depicts the garden as a retreat, as a place of repose and restfulness, an escape from the more frantic world of public life that lies beyond the boundaries of the garden. We have probably all dreamed of chucking up into the air whatever we are doing, our job in particular, and retreating to some quiet and tranquil place where our soul or mind will know some rest. When our passion have run their course, love, which is more steady and subtle than the lust and heat associated with passion which burns out, can blossom in the space of the garden, and yet at the same time a clear line between the garden and the world beyond cannot be drawn. If the garden is a place where we can retreat when we have run our passion's heat, then all that fruit flying about the place in the poem Swift Sander surely mean to suggest voluptuous passion rather than pure aesthetic love. Those luscious cluster, curious peach and melons are all suggestive of lust, a physical pleasure, and yet in the garden, the place where supposedly retreat to when our passions are spent. A different kind of passion can be found in the garden, but it is a passion nevertheless. A dig deeper into the garden, more local details which bloom into a new life in Marvell's poem with closure and lies. Consider his reference to the palm or the oak and bays in the first stanza. These are allusions to respectively military honor, civic virtue, and poetic achievement. Christopher Riggs is a stimulating essay on Andrew Marvell's fondness for using something which William M. was discussing Shelley's poetry he had called the self-inwoven smell, or the short-circuited comparison. It's also sometimes known as reflexive imagery. Things are frequently compared to themselves in Marvell's poetry. Something is its own likeness. Consider these lines from the sixth stanza of the garden. Next question. Attempt a critical appreciation of The Triumph of Life by P.B. Shelley. Written in the early summer of 1822, Shelley left The Triumph of Life unfinished when he died on July 8, 1822, when his boat Dunjaw capsized. Indeed, Shelley had written part of the poem while sailing in this very same boat. Earlier in that same faithful year, feeling restless amid his circle of friends at Pisa and irritated by the company of the sardonic pair, Shelley had a plan to divert his attention to amateur theatrical. He even planned to act in Othello, Though this never came to pass, Shelley continued theatricals even to be interested in drama. He also became infatuated with Jane Williams, the common law wife of his friend Edward, while he shared a summer rental with Edward and Jane. The Casa Magni near Larkin was set amid the romantic surrounding of a steep and thickly wooded hillside. In Jane, Shelley found spiritual relief during times of torment of melancholy. He also enjoyed the beauty of her singing, and she was the inspiration of a series of poems Shelley addresses to her. Best and brightest, fairer far than this fair day. The first of the series is to Jane, the invitation, and it Shelley adopts a relaxed tone that speaks of romantic love in a calm and even voice he would incorporate into his final poem. The Triumph of Life is a poem whose structure bears some resemblance to the medieval genre of the dream vision and allegory or story containing morals and religious significance, though embedded within a more obvious narrative tale. Its common elements include a poet who falls asleep in the idyllic scene, a garden or pleasant wood lulled by the soothing sound of nature, dreaming of real people or symbolic action, which upon walking will be memorable and laden with profound significance. Stated in another way, the dream vision can be the story of the poet's physiological journey, a dream that begins in great confusion and ends with a vision of perfect harmony. Although the triumph of life does not strictly conform to the medieval genre, this genre does provide a framework for understanding the fantastic imagery conjured up by the dreaming poet caught up in a trance of wondrous thought. The poem also takes its name from poem of the medieval poet Petrarch called Triumphi. This word is a form of Latin triumph, referring to the ceremonial entrance of a victorious general into ancient Rome, followed by a procession over the sacred gates, barred to all others. The procession often led to the temple of Jupiter on the Capitol, and it would also include the general's prisoners of war. Essentially, it was made of the triumphator dress is costume on a four-horse chariot accompanied by outrider displaying the spoils of war, the army and the animals for sacrifice. The entire senate and all the magistrates were supposed to escort the entourage. The right to triumph was dependent on a vote of the people granting permission for the general to retain his army in the city. However, in the late republished, the original rules were bent by the influence of political power and soon become the monopoly of the emperor. Other interpretation of the word triumph in the triumph of life are simply procession of or victory, and for Shelley the word may denote humanity's victory over nature and the restraint and struggle restraint and struggle of mortal existence. Or perhaps this poem uses an ironic application of the word triumph for the fraternized crowd and in fact no cause to celebrate. Nevertheless, the consensuousness of the scene also contains suggestion of something far more sacred in its Christian overtones. Rise as the son, their father rose to bear their portion of the toil which he of old took as his own and then imposed on them. Then we understand that the poet is implying significance far deeper than the sensual indulgence of the opening line. Despite all the pageantry, his dream-like vision begins at line 29, which was not slumber, for the sheer its spirit was so transparent that the scene came through this trance strangely transforms the earlier noise into a quieter scene, incorporating some of the elements of its medieval prototype. The birds, the fountain, and the ocean hold sweet talk and musing through the enamored air. However, this quieting of nature serves as the prelude to another unexpected shock, for next we are transported along with the poet into a nightmarish procession thick strewn with summer dust and a great stream of people, numerous as gnats, upon the evening gleam with the strange and foreboding message of imminent death. Next question, bring out the theme of church going by Philip Larkin. Church going is one of the Philip Larkin's best loved poem. It appeared in his second full collection of poetry, The Less Deceived. The title church going is not hyphenated to allow for a secondary meaning to a glimpsed or in fact tertiary meaning, since church going it is itself already carrying a double meaning. It immediately suggested going to church as an act of worship, but Larkin is not a church goer. In that scene, he visits the church for other reason and is not himself a believer or worshipper, but church going also glimmer with another meaning, the idea that the church and institution is going or fading from view. Church going is about something that is fading from view, something that Larkin sees as carrying value and significance, even though he rejects the literal truth of Christianity. He nevertheless sees the importance of cultural rituals and tradition as giving a shape and moments to the rites of passage in our lives. In the last analysis, church going is perhaps the greatest Christian poem written by a non-Christian and a fine, if measured, paean to the continued worth of church in a secular time. As he says elsewhere of something else, let it always be there. The poem begins with the speaker entering into a building the reader later discovers is a church. He is not sure why exactly he wants to be there and is even more confused by what he sees inside. He has seen many altars, pews, and Bibles before and does not feel any type of reverence toward them. The speaker reads briefly from the Bible and exit. Upon leaving the church, he contemplates what the building represents and what it will mean when all the believers are long dead. He pictures the very last explorer of the building and wonders whether he or she will be like him, curious but emotionless. Church going concludes with the speaker deciding that no matter what the building might mean, it is important for humanity that church be maintained. He sees them as being place of coming together and acceptance of one's common humanity with the rest of the world. The speaker glances around and notices all the items that are constant throughout all the churches that he has visited. There are books and sets and stones. He is unsurprised by these sights. He also taken in fact that there is some brass and stuff but the holy end. This mundane way of referring to the altar at the front of the church says a lot about the speaker. He does not hold any reverence or respect for the space he is in. The speaker moves forward to the front of the church and runs his hand over the pews. Once he has made it to the front, he looks around the note and notices what seems to be complete repair and restoration done to the roof. This is a curious fact about the space, and it is so devoid of people. There is no one there to ask why this is the case. The speaker continues his journey through this religious space and takes to reading from the Bible. He speaks a few large-scale verses is an increased volume, spreading the words around the space. He projected voice come back to him is an echo. ओके तो हमारे यहाँ पर असाइनमेंट ख़त्म होता है. इफ़ स्टिल यू हैव एनी डाउट तो आप हमें हमारे व्हाट्सएप पे कांटेक्ट कर सकते हैं जो कि डिस्क्रिप्शन बॉक्स में अवेलेबल है. थैंक यू.